There's so much interest in what happens to life after there is a total understanding. It never seems to be satisfied. There is always this, after self-realization or understanding, how does life happen? Basically, I would say just one thing. The happening of life becomes witnessing. Life becomes witnessing. Witnessing of everything that happens. Everything that happens, in the words of Buddha, events happen, deeds are done, there is no individual doer thereof. That theoretical formula comes into practice. That's all that really happens. Everything that is to be witnessed is witnessed. And when there is nothing to witness, I'll tell you what actually happened once. One of the very first people to come and see me was an American called Henry Denison. He wrote to me and said he was going round the world, he would be passing through Bombay. Could he come and see me for 3 or 4 days? So I said, yes, of course. So he came for 3 or 4 days and stayed for 3 months. And before he left, all the time he was pressing me to go to Hollywood, Los Angeles, as his guest, so that he could arrange some talks. Because in his words, many of his friends did not have both the time and the money to come to India to see me. But they were deeply interested. I was not interested in talking. I was not interested in getting known to be a jnani. I was perfectly satisfied with life as it was going on. So I didn't show much interest in it. So what Henry did was, the last week before he left, he got me a ticket by Air India, Bombay, London, New York, Los Angeles, and back the same way. I had not even any passport. So it began with a stage where I didn't even have a passport. And there was the ticket. So of course, when he reached that stage, I said, then obviously life wants me to go to Los Angeles. And I did. Now, when we had a regular timetable. He would come in the morning at 11 o'clock. The door of the apartment was open. He would come in the elevator, walk through the door, and I would be waiting for him. Once it so happened, he was about 5 minutes late, I think. So he saw me sitting in my rocking chair with my eyes closed. So he tiptoed to his place and sat down. And then some noise, something must have disturbed me. So when I opened my eyes, I saw Henry sitting in his usual place. So before I could say anything, Henry says, before we start talking, tell me what state you are in. So I told Henry, I've never thought about it. But since you asked me, I said I was just sitting there. And if you want to give it a technical name, I would say it was a non-witnessing state. If there is something to be witnessed, it's witnessed. Witnessed in the sense that whatever is seen in the sense that nobody is doing it. No one is doing it. It happens. That is witnessing. Witnessing whatever happens as something that happens and not as something someone does. That is witnessing. But when there is nothing to witness, I was waiting for Henry. There is nothing to witness. So the witnessing state drops a little deeper into non-witnessing. And if the non-witnessing state, in the non-witnessing state, consciousness is still very much on the surface. The traffic noises are heard. The cooking smell comes from the kitchen and is smelled. So it is not as if it's a very deep state. So coming back from the non-witnessing to the witnessing state is extremely simple, almost like the automatic change of gears in a car. It requires no effort. It's almost spontaneous. Witnessing when there is something to be witnessed, going into the deeper state of non-witnessing when there is nothing to be witnessed. And if that non-witnessing state is not disturbed for a while, then the non-witnessing state goes a little deeper. When the sounds are not heard, the smells are not smelled, it's a deeper state. There may be various technical jargon giving a name to that state, but I would call it just deeper state, deeper than non-witnessing. So that is what happens, as far as I am concerned, that is what happens. When talks are going on, the witnessing is obviously there. If there are few people coming and those few people leave and I continue to sit there is nothing to witness. The conversation is not there is no need to witness the consequence, to witness the conversation. So the eyes close, I continue to sit there, or I go to my room and sit there. But then if the non-witnessing state happens, if there is nothing to witness, then something I noticed quite early was that by programming, I would rather walk than sit. So if there is nothing to be done, I usually walk around the apartment from one corner of the apartment to the other apartment, to the other corner. Takes me about 35 steps. So I keep walking, assuming that 25 minutes with interruptions would make a mile. So I roughly calculate that I walk about 4 miles a day, 2 miles in the morning, 2 miles in the evening. What was noticed suddenly one day was that while I was walking, my mantra was spontaneously happening. So also, and after walking for a while, when I feel tired, I just lie down for a while. May not be even 5 minutes, but 5. And my wife sees me lying down for 5 minutes, getting up as if I had something important to do. So he says, "You are lying down, can't you take rest for 20 minutes? So I say, I was not lying down to rest. I was only lying down as a rest between walks. So when I lay down, same thing was happening. The mantra, my mantra has been Shiva mantra. That has been happening. All these years, that's what has been happening. Witnessing, non-witnessing, and in the meanwhile, if something is being done, the mantra goes on spontaneously. And it was a very pleasant surprise for me to come across a sentence from Ramana Maharshi. He said, when spontaneous japa happens, it is self-realization. Just this. When spontaneous japa happens, that means the repetition of the mantra, it is self-realization. So I only read it and said, yes, that's what it is. So that has been what has been happening during my normal day. Basically, in life as it continues, apart from this witnessing and non-witnessing state, the underlying factor which I have noticed is that there are no expectations, no wants, which creates a sense of peace, waiting for whatever to happen that is to happen. That does not mean thoughts don't occur. Thoughts do occur. When I was in Hollywood, the second year with my wife, early in the morning, while getting ready for the talks, when traveling, I would carry a small photograph of Ramana Maharshi. So I mentioned to her, while getting ready, I said, this small photograph of Ramana Maharshi, I don't have a really good one. When I go back to Bombay, I'll arrange for a reasonably large photograph of Ramana Maharshi to hang over my desk. The same day, after maybe half an hour, when I was ready for the talks, someone knocks on the door, comes in with a nicely framed photograph of Ramana Maharshi, just the size I would have bought, and says, I don't know why, but I thought you might like this. I said, I do indeed. And that photograph, which came to me in 1988, 11 years ago, hangs over my desk now. So, there are plenty of photographs, not too many, but all over the place. So I said, that is the Hollywood Ramana. So as I say, not that thoughts of an expectation don't arise, they arise. The curious part of it is, many of them do get satisfied. And whenever this such thing happens, a thought comes and it gets satisfied, a tremendous surge of gratitude arises. A tremendous surge of gratitude arises. Many times donations come in. Once especially I remember, when my wife was in the hospital, a gentleman from Spain, I used to see him maybe 3, 4, 5 days earlier. An extremely nice man, always a smiling face. He walks in, knocks on the door. He says, Ramesh, I understand your wife is in the hospital, in the intensive care unit, which I know is a very expensive place. So perhaps you can use this. He puts his hand out, and there were a pile of $100 notes, which I counted later, and it was $3,500. Just comes in just like that. That he was wealthy enough to afford it goes without saying. But the donation did come when I needed it. But my point really is this. Donations that come in have really nothing to do normally with the need to receive it. the basis of donations from visitors are a token of the impact the teaching has had. To that extent, the need to give donation is to the need to give. And the need to give does not depend on the need to receive. Sometimes, as I say, it happens that what comes in when it was needed. But more times than not, donations have been coming in large numbers. And in one case, it so happened that I received a letter from a professional photographer sent by hand with a friend of his, another professional photographer. So Robert comes with a letter from Justin. And Justin studied at the Cambridge University with English as his subject, what in America would have been called creative writing, I presume. So he has always been sending poems. He had written a very, very lovely poem, beautiful poem. Peculiarly, it was neither writing nor printing. I don't know what he had done, perhaps with his technical knowledge of photography, but it looked beautiful, absolutely worth framing. So I read that, and it was extremely sensitive and spoke of the gratitude he felt because of the teaching. So I sent a brief answer with Robert for Justin, saying, "My dear Justin, thank you for that beautiful poem. What I missed in the envelope was your check in token of your rising prosperity." And I added a PS. The PS was, "I have more money now than I shall ever need in this life." And I sent it with Robert. So, the need to give does not depend on the need to receive. But the point was, there are no expectations, no wants. Therefore, a certain basic peace. If more money comes in than I need, I always say, my wife and I will have only a few more years to live. Yet the money comes in. Because of whose destiny does the money come in? Not ours. We have hardly a few years to live. So obviously the money comes in because it is the destiny of my children and grandchildren, to whom it will go, and some of the charities to which money regularly goes. So donations come and they flow. And when my wife was in the hospital, she knew it was going to be extremely expensive. It was extremely expensive. And yet it was paid without much problem. As the bills came, the money was there, and so when she was well enough to speak, she couldn't speak because there was a pipe in her mouth. So she asked me, "What about money?" So I said, all the bills have been paid. So she makes another gesture. Money comes in and money goes out. So no expectations, no wants. witnessing, non-witnessing. That is what happens in my case. That's how life goes on. Someone asked me, how did the talking happen? The talking happened through Henry Denison. That is how the talking happened. So when I was first in Hollywood, a year earlier than my wife, I went in 1987. And it was a lovely, beautiful house, not much of an entrance, Henry Denison's house. But when you went in, it was situated on the edge of a lake. Beautiful lake opened out. Lovely hall, big hall. 30, 40 people could be accommodated, 50 people could be accommodated. And I just couldn't imagine, being an Indian, that someone could live in a big house like that and not have a servant. It was, to me, unimaginable. Now I know every American lives like that, except a few millionaires like Bill Gates, I suppose. So the next morning, Henry woke up and prepared breakfast for me. So while I was there, early morning, I got up fairly early as usual. And there were several magazines for me. One of them was a magazine called Yoga Journal, which is quite popular, I think. I was going through it, browsing through it, and what came to my attention was the number of advertisements promising, I'm not sure whether the word was enlightenment or what it was, I forget. But what it meant was enlightenment over the weekend for $350. Enlightenment over the weekend, $350. Enroll before such and such a date. So I read that, I closed the magazine, sat there stupefied, and said to myself, what the hell am I doing in this place? Really, what the hell am I doing in this place? That was my reaction. And the answer came to me 2 or 3 days later, after the talk started. A man came to me, knocked on the door at about 8 o'clock. Talks didn't start till 9, I think. He came at 8 o'clock, knocked. I was ready, I happened to be ready. His eyes were absolutely red. It was quite obvious he had a sleepless night. So he came, saw me standing there, and he lay down at my feet full length, as an Indian would do, touched my feet. And while there, he said, I have not done this before any other person. Then he got up and he told me his story. He has been a seeker for 30 years, a personal friend of J. Krishnamurti. And he had read everything that had to be read. And he said, when he had the flyer from Henry Denison, that I was coming, and there was a photograph on that flyer. This man said, when I looked at the photograph, something said, this is the end of my search. And he wanted to talk to me. So he called Henry and said, I want to talk to Ramesh. Can you give me his telephone number? So Henry said, he'll be here in 3 days. Why do you want to bother him now? So he didn't telephone. But this man apparently needed just a little push, and he got that push, and he had the final understanding. I had no doubt about it after I had talked with him for a while. And then, when he went to his room, to the talks room in the talks, and took his usual place, then it struck me, I had the answer. What the hell am I doing here? Then the answer, for this reason. I was there for this person's need. And if it was this person's need, maybe there was a need of other people too. So that's how the talks began. But earlier, I had the authorization from my guru, Nisargadatta Maharaj, to talk. The way it happened was this. That time, probably 2 months before Maharaj died, he was very sick. Normally, he would sit in his usual raised, not chair, 3 or 4 pillows, just to raise, and he would sit there, cross-legged, and talk. But that he couldn't do that for some time. And this particular Sunday morning that I'm talking about, he was lying in bed and talking. And there was a group from a place called Satara, about 200 miles from Bombay. Group of about 7 or 8 people. So at the very beginning of the talk, when they explained they were from Satara, they were a group of spiritual seekers. Maharaj told them, he said, don't each of you ask individual questions. Decide among yourself which are the main points that you want elucidation on, because I am a sick man. So they started talking. Maharaj started talking too. And I was translating. After a few minutes, Maharaj wanted to go down to the toilet or somewhere. So what he said was, you continue with your questions. And he pointed to me and he said, he is authorized to answer. You continue with your questions and he is authorized to answer. When he went down, there were no questions. So obviously there were no answers. Then someone close to me said, Maharaj is going to get very angry when he finds that there has been no... I said, what can I talk unless there are questions? And Maharaj came up, so what's going on? And I said, nothing. He was angry. So I told him, Maharaj, these people have come from 200 miles away not to listen to a human tape recorder. Well, Maharaj grunted. And after that, I never spoke, because people used to come, and I would say, no, you listen to Maharaj. People say, could I come to your place and we could talk? So I said, no, I would rather we meet here and both listen to Maharaj. So even after that authorization, I never spoke, because I did not take it as a total authorization. That authorization was that particular morning. And Maharaj knew it, that I was not speaking. I had not taken it as a blanket authorization. So the day before he died, he was so sick that the attendant had to put his ear close to his mouth when he uttered something. He wanted a drop of water or whatever. He was so sick. And I was by his side, along with the attendant. So he saw me and suddenly got up on his elbow and shouted with his usual strength of voice. Shouted, "Why don't you talk?" And then he fell back. I thought that was the end, but it wasn't. Why? He just said, "Why don't you talk?" That I did take as the final authorization that I should talk. But that didn't mean, as far as I was concerned, to go to the top of the house and shout out, "Look, people, I'm authorized to speak, come." So one of the first people to come to me, apart from Henry Denison, was Heiner Siegelman. But that was a single, one person coming along with Henry Denison. The real talking began when an Australian medical student came from a nearby ashram. He arrived at 7:30 in the morning when my wife and I were having breakfast. So he came in and he said he had come from such and such an ashram. And while I asked him in and I almost insensitively started talking to him, my wife realized that for him to be at our place at 7:30, he must have left his ashram at about 5:30 in the morning. Obviously, without any breakfast. So, she went in, quietly brought some food out, which of course this young man gobbled down with an eagerness that was very interesting to watch. And I looked at my wife in admiration because it hadn't occurred to me. What occurred to her should have occurred to me. But it didn't. It hadn't. So after that, we talked for an hour and a half, 2 hours, I don't know. Then this young man said, "I've been a year at the ashram. This is my last week. And I would like to come again. Could he come again?" So I said, "Of course." The next day, from the railway station, he called me and he says, I forget his name, "I'm so and so." I said, "Come, why are you calling?" So he said, "I've got 3 or 4 other people with me. Can I bring them?" So I said, "Sure." So that's how the talk started. So a group came. Among them, the earliest 2 were my friend Ed Nathanson, who is now in Maui, and a friend of his, Kent Brocklehurst. They were the 2 earliest visitors. Then after that, other people from the ashram came. Ed Nathanson was also in the ashram doing full-time duty. So along with him came one day an ashram swami dressed in ochre robes with malas round his neck. So he listened, but I could see he was extremely restless. At the end of the talk, he was very happy he came. He said so. And he said he would like to come again. So he came 2 or 3 times. But all the time, his conscience was obviously biting him. That he should go to some other person to talk about a subject which was the main thing in the ashram. And he was worried that Ed Nathanson and Kent Brocklehurst might expose him. So the Swami literally hounded them out of the ashram. In a way, I think they were by that time happy enough to leave because of the change in the, let's say, management. So that's how the talk started. So, any questions?
You've just spoken of Ramana.
I beg your pardon?
Sorry. You've just spoken of Ramana.
Ramana, yes.
Yes. Although he was not your actual physical guru.
Yes.
How did that sort of connection happen?
Ramana Maharshi was the earliest inspiration in my life. The earliest inspiration in my life was Ramana Maharshi. I came across a book of his, or about him, when I was 12 years old. And it made a tremendous impression on me. So my earliest inspiration has been Ramana Maharshi. But it was not the destiny of this body-mind organism to sit at Ramana Maharshi's feet, although I could have done it, because I was fully 33 years old when Ramana died. I could have gone, I wanted to, but I was so busy with my early career that it was not possible. So I could only take it that the destiny of this body-mind organism was not to be able to sit at Ramana Maharshi's feet, but at Nisargadatta's feet. You see? So someone once asked Nisargadatta, he said, "Is there any difference between you and Ramana?" And Nisargadatta, with his usual sense of humor, said, "None at all, except that I'm slightly better dressed." But my earliest inspiration has been Ramana Maharshi.
And I also wanted to ask, yesterday afternoon we were talking about acceptance.
Yes.
And I struggle with that a lot myself because
Yes.
I have an illness, and in a way I have to accept that illness is happening in my body.
Yes.
But at the same time, acceptance is not fatalism, it is not resignation, it is not despair.
You are absolutely correct. You are absolutely correct. According to my concept, acceptance does not mean resignation, which means that having accepted a particular situation, I'm not saying that you should not do whatever you think you should do and use whatever facilities are available. But the only point is, having used those facilities, after that, the illness still remains, then there is acceptance. Instead of, which would otherwise have happened, frustration. You see, you make use of all the facilities available, and you fortunately say, let us say you are able to, you can afford the most expensive facilities available for your ailment, and yet nothing happens. Then acceptance brings about a lack of frustration. That is the advantage of acceptance. Without acceptance, there would be frustration. See? So, I repeat, if I have a headache, I go and take a couple of aspirins. Nothing happens, 3 hours later I take another couple of aspirins. Still nothing happens, then it is accepted that I have to bear the headache as long as it will. So when I mentioned that the expectations happen and they are generally satisfied, and therefore a sense of gratitude arises along with the donations. But that does not mean I have not had my share of pain and grief. I've had my share of pain and grief. But the remarkable thing is that there is no lasting memory of it. My elder son had asthma from very early age. It began with a skin problem, eczema. And we were warned that if that eczema is treated, it might convert itself into asthma. But the eczema was so bad that my wife and I decided we had to take a chance, and we had the eczema treated. And as we were warned, he did get asthma from a very early age, when he was 2 or 3 years old. And my wife and I have spent night. You see, we have a very nice apartment, which was nicer 50 years ago. So at that time, we had an open veranda, open to the skies. So, night after night, my wife and I would take this child in our lap, me or she, alternately, while he couldn't sleep. So he was breathing hard. And he would sit on my lap and watch the constellation. He's an extremely intelligent boy. He would watch these constellations. And at about 4 or 4:30 in the morning, he would tell me, he said, you know, that group of stars will very soon go about 2 inches further, and then there will be light, and we can both sleep. We can both go to sleep. So we have spent nights like that. And he had this asthma throughout his life. And at the end of his life, he died in 1990, when my wife and I were in Seattle for a series of talks. He found, and he used to sit in his room, and I would talk outside. And while sitting in his room, he would listen to the talks that were going on. This was after he had taken a job and had to give it up because of asthma. So he was at home. So last, say, 10 years of his life. People would come and we would talk, not like less than 2 or 3 years before his death. He would listen to people who would come and talk to them. And as I say, extremely intelligent. So he got the hang of the talks. He knew he had a very, very good understanding. And I remember once, a really ripe visitor came and I was talking to him. And then Ajit, that is the name of the son, he goes to the kitchen and tells my wife, this one is a good one. The visitor with whom I was talking there, she goes to my wife, this one is a good one. So he himself had a very good understanding. So the ultimate result was that his asthma kept him awake, and he found that the only thing that could give him some sleep, 2 or 3 hours at night, was alcohol. So he became an alcoholic addict. He couldn't sleep unless he had taken a fair amount of alcohol the evening. everybody warned him. My nephew, he is a doctor, warned him. He said, look, this is only going to kill you. So he said, I know it. And he says, I know more than that. I know all that is to be known. And I'll continue to drink it because I have to drink, because I have to sleep. And of course, he continued to drink. He had a liver ailment and he died. So when I was in Seattle, the telephone call came. Ajit is extremely serious. So perhaps you would like to come back. So what we did was, my wife came back and I continued with the talks. And when my wife was in New York, on her way to Bombay, she called me. But in the night, I had a call that he had died. So, but I didn't tell my wife that he is dead. Why make her grieve 12 hours earlier? There will be enough grief 12 hours later. So she came back to Bombay and found that he was dead. So, I've had my share of grief. The other thing was, my daughter, my married daughter, found that she had a problem. Her husband had a problem with drink. And another problem was that he was naturally generous. So generous that it was a fault. He was generous to a fault. So she had lots of problems with him. So, with an unhappy daughter, you can't remain a happy, peaceful person. So that's why I say I've had my share of grief and I've had my share of pain, because some years ago, 2-3 years ago, I had a back pain which the doctor couldn't really understand, because that was low back pain where I could sit and talk. So the back pain didn't stop the talks. The talks went on. I could sit, I could stand, I could walk about with a reasonable amount of pain being accepted. But I could not lie down. And the doctor said, this is the first case I have found where you are not able to lie down. Usually the relief from back pain comes because of lying down. So I spent quite a few days sitting in the chair. So it is not that after self-realization, life becomes smooth. It does, in the sense that you accept the pain and the pleasure. To that extent, there is peace. But the grief and the pain, which are based on your destiny, are not wiped out. The Hindu word used is prarabdha, which Ramana Maharshi used quite frequently. He said, nobody can get rid of his prarabdha, which is destiny. So, basically, life as it happens with me is, I repeat, witnessing when there is something to be witnessed, non-witnessing when the witnessing disappears, and accepting that whatever happens is not someone doing anything. So, if someone does something to hurt me, the hurt will happen. And even that happening of that hurt will depend on the extent to which I succumb to it. But there is never any feeling that someone has hurt me. So there is no hatred towards anybody, which is part of the peace I am talking about. So, whatever is happening is seen as something that is happening, part of the events that are happening, deeds that are being done, but not by an individual. That is the basic understanding which prevails in life after the final understanding. Not only that I am not doing anything, but more importantly, no one else is doing anything either. So with that understanding, whatever is happening is merely witnessed, including, I repeat, my own share of grief and pain.
Thank you.
Ramesh,
Yes.
is witnessing only possible for an enlightened person?
I'm sorry?
I would
Is
like-
witnessing?
Possible only after self-realization?
No.
Before, is it not observing?
No. Witnessing can happen beginning with the smallest intellectual understanding. Witnessing can happen. What does witnessing mean? Witnessing means the cutting off of the involvement. Involvement of the individual observer, observing something, judging it, and being happy or unhappy. That is involvement. That is what happens in the case of most body-mind. Involvement one after another. Involvement begins, say from 0 to 10 goes, another involvement begins and goes from 0 to... That is what life is all about for an ordinary person. But when this understanding happens, I repeat, which is the most encouraging point, that even when the understanding is purely intellectual, even doubtful, then what happens is the involvement begins. And at some point, perhaps 8 or 9 or even 10, that little bit of understanding comes into action and cuts off the involvement, saying that nobody is doing anything. And as the understanding goes deeper, the cutting off of the involvement happens quicker and quicker and quicker, until towards the end, when the understanding is final. Even when the understanding is final, involvement need not occur. Involvement may occur, but what happens is the full understanding cuts off the involvement at the very start. So the starting of the involvement and cutting off of it is almost simultaneous. But until then, it goes gradually from 0 to 10. The extent of the understanding cuts off the involvement at the appropriate stage, from 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, right down to the zeros. So it is not that witnessing can happen and involvement can not happen only after the final stage. No, because the understanding itself is a process.
Thank you.
I remember an article in a German magazine, I think
Yes.
it was Connection, and you talked that courage is not necessary on the way, on the path. Courage.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Oder Mut? Was heißt das?
Courage.
Courage.
Yes.
That is a stupid thing to think that courage is necessary on the path, on the way.
Well, no, it's both stupid and wise. You see, courage is necessary, but it is not courage over which you have control. If courage is necessary, and it is the destiny of this body-mind organism and the will of God for the understanding to happen, then that courage will happen at the necessary time. That is the point. If effort is necessary, effort will not be made if it is not God's will and the destiny of this body-mind organism, to make the effort. But if it is the destiny of this body-mind organism to make the effort, effort will be made. So is effort necessary? Yes. But the making of that effort is not in your control. I repeat, effort is necessary, yes. Courage is necessary. Whether you call it courage, whether you call it determination, whether you call it effort, these are only words. But whatever is necessary will happen only if it is God's will and the destiny of that particular seeker. Please.
Yeah. When the teaching, the understanding sinks deeper,
Yes.
then I've been experiencing in the past year that lots of unconscious items bubble up
Yes.
and need to be faced or dealt with.
That's right.
And it's often a kind of feeling of frustration,
Yes.
despair, anxiety, and
Certainly.
so on.
Certainly.
And my question is that part of the dark side of the soul, or is the dark side of the soul something different?
Well, you see, now somehow I didn't imagine that the words will have such an impact as I could see yesterday. You see, the process itself, the words I refer to, the dark night of the soul, is towards the end of it. The process takes its time. You see? So while the process is taking its time, while the understanding goes deeper, the flip-flops occur. You see? Sometimes you have that feeling of peace, sometimes that peace is disturbed. How often and how deep the peace is, and how often that peace gets disturbed, depends on the level of the understanding. As the understanding goes deeper, the periods and intensity of the peace increase. You see, but the flip-flops occur. But at one time, the flip-flops create frustration. But as the understanding goes deeper, the understanding includes the understanding that flip-flops are part of the process. So, even when the flip-flops occur, they are merely witnessed without any frustration resulting. That itself is part of the process. But this dark night of the soul, I referred particularly to this process of investigation. The investigation, am I really the doer? And that, I would say, is probably the final end of the understanding. I mean, there is total intellectual acceptance that I am not the doer. Then you find from investigation, day after day, that from your own experience, from your own investigation, you have come to the conclusion that there is truly no action which you can call your action. We have come to the total conclusion. You see? Then at that stage, according to my concept, don't forget it's a concept, the dark night of the soul begins. When the total acceptance, from personal experience, I have not been doing anything. Then the question arises, if I am not doing it, who is this me? Is there a me at all? And that question starts the dark night of the soul. And the answer, that the length of the dark night, how long the dark night is, will again depend on God's will and the destiny of this body-mind organism. So when the intensity of the question, if I am not doing any act, who is this me? Who is this me? That is the one, you see. And this who is this me, at one point, becomes not an intellectual question by an individual, but the question arises from the very depth of your being, which is the soul, which is the source. So the question arises from the source with an intensity, who is this me? And then, as I said, again, if it is God's will and the destiny of this body-mind organism, the length of the night depending again on God's will and the destiny of this, the answer comes from the source, you see, in compassion. There never has been a me, my dear child. There is never no need to suffer. But suffering was part of the destiny of that body-mind organism, and it had to suffer. And the one body-mind organism that I know of who did not have any kind of suffering of the seeking is Ramana Maharshi. He was never a seeker. He never was a seeker. And yet the experience happened. So he did not have to come to the understanding by way of seeking. That is the solitary case that I know of, where there was no seeking.
So the dark night of the soul can be described as the dying process of the thinking mind.
That is correct.
And it ends when the
You are-
I am resurrects, so to speak.
That's right, you are quite right. The dark night of the soul is the final pains of the dying ego. The final pains of the dying ego. But the process itself is not covered by my concept of that is the final stage. You see, the dark night of the soul, according to my concept, is the final stage of the dying ego.
Thank you.
I have realized that I am not the doer, that the source lives through me. But where do I go when I leave the earth? Do I reincarnate, or what happens to me?
Now, wait a minute. How, you see, how did you begin your question?
I
have realized that I am not the doer.
I realize that I am not the doer.
Then, where is the me? If the me is not the doer, who is this me? There can be no me without being a doer.
Right? That is, yes, somewhere is my question.
Yes.
If it is not me,
Yes.
then where does
Who?
go to?
You see, if there is no me, where does who go after death?
Where does who go
After
after
that?
that?
Who goes after death? You see, that is why the main point is who or what dies. That is the basic question.
Yes.
Who or what dies? You cannot die because you were never born.
Right.
What was born will die. What was born is this body-mind organism. This body-mind organism which was created will be destroyed.
Yes.
And there is a question of anybody going from anywhere to anywhere. That is why Lord Buddha's words, as I have understood, there is no soul, therefore there is no transmigration of souls. He is clear and definite. There are events happening, deeds being done, no individual doer thereof. And who is this who is supposed to be reborn? The individual who does bad things in this life and will therefore suffer in the next life. That is the basis of rebirth, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So, if you accept die will be done, truly and finally, which means there is no individual to do anything. And if there is no individual who acts, I am saying there is no individual to commit any sin. That's why I said in the very first talk, you cannot commit a sin because you cannot do an act. And if there is no me to do any act, to commit any sin or a merit, an act of merit, who gets reincarnated? In any case, your name is?
Anya.
Anya?
Yes.
All right. Now, Anya in this life is told that Anya is suffering because Anya did bad deeds in her previous life. Right?
Yes.
So, in that previous life, was there an Anya?
To your theory, no.
Anya was not there in the previous life, who knows that she is suffering in this life. There is no Anya who did bad deeds in the previous life, who now knows that she, Anya, is suffering in this life. Similarly, there will be no Anya in the next life to realize that she is having a wonderful life because Anya in this life did good deeds. There was Anya is only in this life, and Anya is merely the name given to a body-mind organism which was born and which will die. So it is the body-mind organism which was created, which will be destroyed, the body-mind organism which is born, which will die. Where is the question of any Anya?
Right, okay. If I am not Anya, I am me, the eternal. Where do I go to when I leave this plane?
If you are the eternal, you are asking me where does the eternal go?
To eternity.
Is that what you are asking? Where does the
Yes,
eternity?
obviously I am giving my own answers here.
You are indeed. You are indeed. That is why I say when a question arises, go back to the basics. You won't need an answer.
Right.
I repeat, whenever a question arises, if you
Yes.
go back to the basics, you will not need an answer because the question will disappear.
But there was in my life a thought that I wanted to be a doctor and I wanted to be a captain. But if I am eternal, can I be a captain? And can I be
So, it is not the eternal who wanted to be a doctor. It is not the eternal who wanted to be a doctor. It is the ego which the eternal created
right.
so that life as we know it can happen through what I call again my concept, divine hypnosis. It is that ego who wanted to be a doctor. And
yes,
was,
I understand.
and was either happy or unhappy because she didn't become a doctor. It is the ego, not the eternal, who wanted to be a doctor.
It is the ego that wanted to be a doctor. Okay.
Yes,
All right.
not the eternal.
I have not achieved that.
The ego, you have not achieved it.
No.
That is frustration.
Yes.
Now, being a doctor is interesting. I have a nephew who is a very successful pediatrician, children's doctor, at a comparatively early age of 39. I remember when he was 5 or 6 years old, he would say, "I'm going to be a doctor." So I used to ask him, "Why do you want to be a doctor? Because doctors make a lot of money?" He said, No. I want to be a doctor because I want to cure people. 5 or 6. I want to be a doctor because I want to cure people. And he did become a doctor, as I say, a successful doctor. And he's a successful doctor because basically that body-mind organism was programmed to be a doctor. He was programmed to be a doctor and fortunately destined to be a doctor.
So I was not programmed to be a doctor.
Or that, no, you may have been programmed to be a doctor but not destined to be a doctor.
All right.
You see, actually, You are probably programmed to be a doctor. That is why you wanted to be a doctor. Assuming you really wanted to be a doctor like my nephew did. But if you wanted to be a doctor to make money, then you were not programmed to be a doctor.
All right. I'm a bit confused about that.
I'm sorry.
Ich möchte meine Frage auf Deutsch stellen, bitte. Verstehe ich das richtig, dass es nach dem Konzept keine Instanz wie das Gewissen gibt?
He's asking whether he is right that according to your concept, there is no instance. There is no conscious.
Conscience.
Conscience, yeah.
Yes. You are talking of conscience? All right. You tell me what you mean by conscience. You use the word conscience. What do you mean by conscience? Do you mean the inner voice?
Dass praktisch nicht zu unterscheiden ist zwischen Gut und Böse, dass das nicht möglich ist, dass ich meine Absicht bewerte, dass ich keinen Willen habe, was Gutes zu tun oder was Böses zu tun, dass das nicht möglich ist.
He means that there is no difference between good and bad, that it is not possible to distinguish for him.
Now, look, the Israeli Prime Minister, Ishaq Rabin, was shot dead by a young man. The young man shot him because he thought, according to his conscience, that Ishaq Rabin should not be the Prime Minister anymore because he was bad for the country. So he did what his conscience told him to do. And he said so to the policemen when they asked him, why did you do it? And he says, God made me do it. That is what I read in the report in the newspaper. His words were, God made me do it. In other words, his conscience told him to do it and he did it. According to my concept, it was the destiny of a body-mind organism called Ishaq Rabin to be murdered at that moment of time by another body-mind organism whose destiny it was to kill the other body-mind organism. So the murder happened because it was the destiny of two body-mind organisms to get together at that time, and the destiny of one was to kill the other, according to conscience. So, whether you call it conscience, whether you call the inner voice, that would be really part of the programming.
But where is the difference between, maybe he followed opinions of his group or his religious groups, and it was not his conscience. Where is the difference between the programming and the conscience? That means the level of the Atma on the level of the consciousness on the level of mind. He means if there is God working on a level of mind, saying this is the best for you, not following the opinions of others.
So, it was the conscience of this young man not to follow the opinions of those who admired Ishaq Rabin, but his own conscience, and kill the man, which he did according to his conscience. So who decides whether it is good or bad? That man did what his conscience told him to do. So who decides whether it is good or bad? It is the society and the law who will decide what is good or bad according to the prevailing standards of morality. Good or bad? Is abortion good or is abortion bad? Abortion was a crime in most countries until a few years ago. today the developing countries, the governments of developing countries are sponsoring abortion, free abortion, publicized. So is abortion good or is abortion bad? Was abortion good until 5 years, bad until 5 years ago, and is now good? And is it good only for developing countries and bad for developed countries? Who decides? So good and bad are terms which are capable of different interpretation at different times. In some countries, whipping, public whipping, is part of the law. In other countries, it is considered brutal and barbarous.
But is there not a higher intelligence in us which is above all opinions and above the conditioning?
The higher intelligence does what is supposed to be done. So, you act according to your conscience. And what happens could not have happened unless it is the will of God. That is why I say the murder of Ishaq Rabin was the will of God. And in practical terms, it means the destiny of two body-mind organisms, one to be killed, the other to kill. Murder happens. A killing happens. A killing happens because it is the destiny of two body-mind organisms, one to be killed, the other to kill. That is why the murder, the killing happened. And if the killing happened, it was because it was God's will. Otherwise, it would not have happened.
Just talking about killing. So I'm hoping I can get this question formed.
I'm sorry?
I'm hoping I can get this question formed properly. There is something that my mind does where I go to imagining myself, I don't know why I do this, I'm imagining myself getting killed, right? Stabbed or physically hurt. And it's as if I'm testing the concept there, and I don't seem to be able to hold the concept that this is God's will. It's like if I'm walking along and feeling frightened for my physical safety, it's like the concept, I want it to be my will again, and I want to not get hurt. I don't want to feel physical pain. Yes. And it's like there's part of me that goes, I don't want the concept if it means physical pain, if it means agreeing to be physically hurt somewhere.
So what you are saying is that the me does not want the pain. It is a wanting. And the moment there is wanting, there is frustration. If it doesn't turn up, you want something, it ends either in happiness or unhappiness. So the only way, the peace is for the wants not to be there. And that is the great big effect of the understanding. No wants, no expectations. So the eradication of the wants is the result only of the final understanding, which is the annihilation of the ego. The ego who does the wanting, it is the ego who suffers happiness or unhappiness.
It's not so much wanting in this case. Maybe it is.
Oh,
maybe
wanting not to be killed.
Wanting. Yes, not wanting. Yes.
Wanting not to be killed. But maybe why this fear of being killed is there, probably a therapist could find out. And he could get rid of it. So if I have a headache, I take an aspirin. So because there is physical disease, there are physicians. Because there are mental aberrations, there are psychotherapists.
Ramesh, could you talk about bhakti?
Bhakti? Yes. You see, bhakti as against, your name is?
Vivian.
Vivian. Vivian, when you talk of bhakti, what exactly do you mean?
Well, that's a good question because the words are new to me, but there's this thing I've been reading, bhakti and jnana or whatever.
Yes. So, what you are thinking of is bhakti as contrasted with jnana. That's what you are talking of.
I guess what I'm asking is, I mean, I love hearing you talk.
Yes.
But in another way, it doesn't seem to matter whether you talk or not.
Yes.
And there is this love.
Yes.
And I could say, I love you, but it's not. It's not. There's no I and there's no you. And
there is only love. Is that what you are saying?
And loving, so it's sort of like loving the truth, but it's not. It's the same truth in you in here, but
yes.
It's not me, and it's not you.
You see, the basis of bhakti is duality. That is, God and me. Bhakti is, you say all this knowledge is dry. I'm not concerned with it. I'm quite happy to be a me. I'm quite happy to be a miserable, suffering me. All I want is to remember God. In fact, that is exactly what a Maharashtrian saint sings. You see? He says, all I want from you, put me into as many births as you like, but just give me one thing, that I shall never forget you. All that the bhakta asks of his God, please don't let me forget you. That is all. In other words, what he says is, I don't know about this oneness, I don't know anything about noumenality, I don't know anything about anything. All I know is that I need you, so please let me never forget you. That is bhakti. Now the same poet, the same saint who wrote this, you see, became a jnani. And why does a bhakta become a jnani? The answer is given in the Bhagavad Gita. Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita says, when the intensity of a bhakta for his God, wanting to know God, reaches a certain intensity, I give him or her the receptivity to get knowledge, to get jnana. I repeat, when the intensity of a bhakta for his God reaches a certain degree, then I, that is the same God which the bhakta reveres, give him the receptivity to have knowledge. So this, the name of this Maharashtrian saint is Tukaram, the most beloved saint in Maharashtra. And this Tukaram, as a bhakta, prays to God. He says, for those who want to see you in your formless way, for them be formless. But for me, life after life, please have a form which I can worship. That is how he begins. Please for me always have a form which I can worship. Then, when the knowledge happened, and the same Tukaram tells his God, you are a cheat. You know that you and I are not different, yet you made me worship you for all these years. You see? And the same Tukaram who tells, please be in form to worship you, he also sings another verse. He said, you foolish people, why do you go to temples? Why don't you worship the God within? Same Tukaram, after the knowledge happened, he tells people, You foolish people, why do you go to temples? Why don't you worship the God within? You see, this is a change that has happened in the same body, mind, organism. So, bhakti turns into jnana. My own personal experience has been that the bhakti and jnana are really not two. Now, there, Ramana Maharshi's concept is that there are two ways to reach a summit. That is his concept. My own concept is totally different. My own concept that they are not two ways, but they are the same way. And you can see that in my concept. Where does the inquiry happen? Which is the same as Ramana Maharshi. Who am I? That is, who is this me? Is there a me at all? That is the final question. So that is the end, which is the knowledge. But where do I begin? Where do I begin? I begin with, thy will be done. So who is this thee whose will prevails? God, isn't it? So, my teaching begins with bhakti and ends with jnana. And the changing from one to the other is again what I call the dark night of the soul. It begins with bhakti, thy will be done. Nothing can happen unless it is the will of God. That is how I begin. Then from there, you say, if nothing happens, if it is, I have no free will, then I say, you do have free will. You have free will to make a decision. And how do you make a decision? On what you think you should do. And what is decided by, what you should do is decided by what? By your programming, which is not in your control. So you do have free will, make a decision, and there your free will ends. You see? So I begin with bhakti, and finally you go down an investigation. You find, I am not the doer. So if I am not the doer, who is this me? Is there a me at all? That final question arising from the degree of intensity of bhakti brings about the answer from the source. My dear child, there never was a me to suffer. It was merely a hypnosis, an illusion. So when the illusion is noticed as illusion, that is jnana. What is jnana? The illusion or hypnosis to be seen as illusion. That is jnana. And so long as the illusion is there, me is there, then the me, all that the me can do is surrender to his will. So you begin with surrendering to his will, which ultimately leads to the question, is there a me at all? You see? So as far as my concept is concerned, they are not two ways reaching the summit, but they're one way of beginning in bhakti and ending in jnana, just one. They're not even two different ways according to my concept.
Ramesh, you were describing earlier that when you were waiting in your apartment for Mr. Dennison to come, and you said that it was a non-witnessing state. Now,
yes.
Can you please clarify it for me before you go? If somebody has never heard of this teaching
yes.
or gone into any self-inquiry,
yes.
they are daydreaming, there's no understanding, presumably, even on an intellectual level, of what witnessing is.
Then?
For that person, there is no understanding, presumably, of what witnessing is.
That is correct.
Unless they're a seeker.
Yes.
You're not meaning that when you say a non-witnessing state.
No, what I'm saying...
Are you meaning what we would call the Turiya state?
The non-witnessing state goes with the witnessing state. They are together. But what is opposite the witnessing state is the observing state. The contrast to the witnessing is observing by an individual observer. You see, in witnessing, there is no individual witnesser to judge what is witnessed. That is why I say the perfect example of witnessing is a young baby, contented. You see, she's had her food, her diapers need not be changed, she's contented. Just to watch a baby is most interesting. It is not that the look is unintelligent. The look takes in what is there, that it is witnessed. And what is witnessed, the baby reacts to what is witnessed. That means the body-mind organism reacts to what is witnessed. You go and a baby is, and you make faces at her, you make her cry. You smile at her and she smiles. So the smile and the frown and the crying are the reactions of the body-mind organism to the outside event. But the outside event is merely witnessed. He doesn't say, this bearded man frightens me. That other man is a nice man. He doesn't frighten me. He makes me smile. That is the judgment which the baby does not make. The baby merely sees an event which either frightens her or makes her smile. So, in the opposite of witnessing is not non-witnessing. Opposite of witnessing is observing by an individual observer who observes and judges.
Yes, that I understand. I'd just like that clarified when you said non-witnessing.
No, in both non-witnessing, when there is something to be witnessed, witnessing happens. When there is nothing to be witnessed, as in deep sleep, there is no witnessing.
Yes, this I understand. Now, where does the fourth state, Turiya, come in?
I'm sorry?
Where does the fourth state, waking, dreaming, dreamless sleep, and the fourth state of Turiya?
Yes.
What English analogy do you bring in for this fourth state? That in the night there is nothing to see anything.
Then that state is witnessing when there is something to be witnessed, non-witnessing when there is nothing to be witnessed. And when the non-witnessing state goes a little deeper, when even the senses are not functioning, then presumably that deeper state is what is supposed to be known by Turiya. You see, a state deeper than non-witnessing. In non-witnessing, as I told you, the senses are working. You hear the sounds, you smell the smells, but if that state is not disturbed for a while, then it may go into a deeper state. And that deeper state is supposed to be used by the word Turiya.
Thank you very much, Ramesh. Thank you.
Most welcome. Well, shall we start the bhajan? Oh, yes. Then make that the last question.
Yes. Ramesh, this intensity you were talking about,
yes,
that it comes a certain point. My understanding now is...
The intensity of bhakti, you mean?
Yes, yes, yes. It's, I cannot do nothing about it.
No, that is quite correct. So, I don't say when you reach that intensity of bhakti. Yeah. When that intensity of bhakti is reached.
Oh, yeah. And this is grace already, this happening. Grace is happening in this case. It's a grace that this...
Grace has already begun with the seeking, of which you are not even aware.
Yeah.
Grace has already begun. Who started the seeking? That's why I say you didn't start the seeking. The seeking of the demolition of the ego was started by the same power the moment he created the egos. So the seeking has been happening.